It started as just another school morning. Same crowded hallways, same shuffling backpacks, same cold stares. But for 9-year-old Daniel, this day would be different, a day that would leave scars you couldn't see. They didn't even wait until he was out of earshot. Words like stones, thrown casually. Look at him, can't even walk right. The kind of cruelty that hides behind a laugh. And yet in that moment, Daniel didn't say a word. He didn't have to. His father was watching. David had seen it before, the whispers, the stares. But there was something different today. Maybe it was the way the boys puffed out their chests. Or maybe it was the way they looked at Daniel like he was less. Either way, David knew this wasn't going to end with a quiet drive home. Most parents, they tell their kids to ignore it. They're just words. But David believed words could destroy a person from the inside out. And he wasn't about to let these boys get away with it. What happened next didn't just change that afternoon. It changed how those boys would see the world and themselves for the rest of their lives. It was just another Tuesday morning. At least, that's what Daniel thought. The hallway smelled faintly of floor cleaner. Backpacks thumped against lockers. Sneakers squeaked on polished tile. For most kids, it was just background noise. But for Daniel, every sound seemed sharper, heavier, especially that sound. The laughter, not the kind you share with friends. This was the kind that makes your chest tighten. It started low, a chuckle, a whisper, then swelled, carrying words that didn't even need to be clear to hurt. He'd heard enough of them before to fill in the blanks. They didn't bother hiding it. One boy elbowed another, grinning as their eyes followed the slow roll of Daniel's wheelchair. "Look at him," one muttered, not caring who heard. Daniel kept moving, eyes fixed on the floor. His shoulders stiffened. His hands gripped the armrests a little tighter. He'd learned to pretend he didn't hear, but pretending didn't stop the sting. And what he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that just a few steps away, someone was watching. Someone who'd heard every word. Someone who wasn't about to let it slide. If you ever seen a moment like this and stayed silent, you know it lingers. It sits in the back of your mind, replaying, making you wish you'd spoken up. That's why stories like this matter. And if you agree they need to be told, you already know what to do. Subscribe before we go any further. Because this is only the beginning. David sat in his truck, engine off, watching the steady stream of kids spill into the building. His hands rested on the steering wheel, but his eyes were somewhere else entirely. Through the glass doors, he caught a flicker of movement. His son's wheelchair. He watched Daniel push forward, head down. Then he saw them, the boys. It wasn't hard to figure out what was happening. He'd seen this body language before. The leaning, the whispering, the sudden glance followed by a laugh. David's jaw locked. He'd raised his son to be strong, but strength had limits. And sometimes silence wasn't noble, it was dangerous. He didn't move. Not yet. But something inside him had shifted. That familiar burn in his chest, part anger, part protectiveness, was starting to spread. And the thing about David, once that feeling took root, he never ignored it. If you've ever been in a moment where you saw something wrong and didn't step in, you know it stays with you. You remember the look on their face. You remember the sound of the laughter. And maybe right now you're thinking, I should have done something. That's why this channel tells stories that remind us to act. So if you're watching and you haven't subscribed, why not? Before the hallway laughter, before the stairs, mornings at home were different. Here, Daniel was just Daniel, not the kid in the wheelchair. His mornings always took longer. Every button, every strap on his shoes was a small battle, but he never complained. He just worked through it, piece by piece. David knew how much his son hated needing help, and each time he reached down to tie those laces, he felt the same thought tugging at him. I wish the world could see him for who he really is. By the time the bus came, Daniel's shoulders were straight, his chin was up, but David knew that confidence had been stitched together carefully, and that the wrong words could unravel it in seconds. And that's why, when David saw those boys leaning against the lockers, he knew exactly what they were taking from his son. Some people think kids are resilient, that they bounce back no matter what. But if you've lived long enough, you know that isn't always true. Sometimes one moment, one comment, can stick with them for years. If you believe a parent should never sit back when that happens, you already know the kind of stories we tell here. Don't just watch. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the moment this story turns. David stayed still for a long moment. The truck was quiet except for the ticking sound of the cooling engine. He could feel the pressure building in his chest, that slow, steady heat that always came before a decision. He'd been here before, moments when it would have been easy to say nothing, to drive away and let someone else deal with it. But no one else ever did. This wasn't just another school day. He could see in the way his son moved. Slower, heavier, as if the laughter had already started to sink in. David exhaled slowly, the kind of breath you take before stepping into something you can't undo. There was no plan yet, no script, just a decision that he would not let those boys get away with this. He stepped out, boots hitting the pavement. The morning air felt colder now, sharper. Somewhere inside that building, 3 boys thought they'd gotten away with it, but they hadn't. Sometimes, standing up for someone means stepping into a storm. And once you do, you can't go back pretending it's not there. If you're still watching and haven't subscribed yet, maybe ask yourself, is it because you don't want to see what happens next, or because you know you will? The school doors loomed ahead, polished glass hiding everything beyond them. David pushed one open, the faint smell of disinfectant and pencil shavings greeting him like an old memory he'd rather forget. He didn't rush. His steps were steady, measured. He wasn't here to cause a scene, not yet. He was here to make sure they saw him before they heard him. Each step was a quiet announcement. I'm coming. They saw him before they understood why he was there. At first, they just exchanged looks. The kind of nervous glances kids share when they sense trouble but still think they're in control. David didn't look away. He wanted them to feel that weight, the same way his son had felt theirs. Sometimes the scariest thing isn't someone yelling. It's someone walking toward you in silence, like they already know exactly what they're going to do. If you think you keep watching to see what happens next, that's why you need to subscribe now. Because what's coming, they'll never forget it. They didn't move when he got closer. If anything, they straightened up as if they needed to prove they weren't intimidated. The tallest one tilted his head, smirk widening. You lost or something? His voice carried just loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. They thought it was a game, that a few smart remarks could keep them in control, that he was just another dad who'd mutter a warning and walk away. But David didn't answer. Not yet. He let the silence hang, long enough for it to feel uncomfortable, long enough for them to realize he wasn't blinking. The second one's laugh cracked into a cough. The third stopped looking at David altogether, suddenly interested in the floor tiles. Confidence is loud until it meets the kind of quiet that can't be shaken. And if you're still watching without subscribing, maybe it's because you don't want to feel that same chill they're starting to feel right now. David stopped, close enough to smell the sharp scent of their expensive cologne mixed with the faint chemical tang of the hallway cleaner. He didn't rush his first words. Was it funny? His voice was low, steady, the kind of tone that doesn't need to be raised to be heard. The smirk faded, replaced with a flicker of confusion. The other two looked at each other, as if waiting for someone else to step up. I'm only going to ask you once, he said, his gaze never leaving the leader. When you laughed at my son, what exactly was a joke? No one answered. The laughter was gone now, replaced with the sound of lockers slamming somewhere far down the hall. The thing about asking a question like that is, it doesn't need an answer. It forces them to see what they've done without you saying another word. And if you're still watching without subscribing, maybe it's because you don't want to see the moment they break. But trust me, you will. The noise of the hallway had changed. Conversations quieted as kids passing by slowed just enough to see what was happening. The 3 boys weren't laughing anymore. The leader's jaw shifted, his mouth open like he might speak. But nothing came out. That confident swagger he'd worn minutes ago had slipped right off. David didn't need to move closer. His stillness said more than any step could. Every second of silence pressed heavier on them. The second boy's eyes darted to the lockers, then to the floor, then back to David. Like a trapped animal looking for an escape. They'd expected an argument they could win with a few clever lines. Instead, they got a wall they couldn't climb. There's a moment in every fight when one side realizes they've already lost. And if you're still watching but haven't subscribed yet, maybe you're waiting for proof that this ends the way you hope. But the ending? It's even better than that. David didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten them. Instead, he reached into his back pocket and pulled out something small, something they weren't expecting. It was a photo. The edges were worn, like it had been carried for years. He held it out toward the leader. "This is my son," David said quietly. "The same boy you decided was worth mocking." They didn't reach for it, but they couldn't look away. The smile in the picture was so bright, so unguarded, it almost hurt to see. He survived surgeries you couldn't imagine, nights in hospitals you've never seen. And even on his worst days, he's never treated anyone the way you treated him this morning. The hallway was silent. No comebacks, no laughter, just the sound of a bell ringing faintly in the distance. Some lessons aren't about punishment. They're about holding up a mirror and forcing someone to see who they are. And if you've been watching this far without subscribing, maybe you don't think these stories matter. But if you do, you'll want to stay for what happens next. The leader's lips pressed into a thin line. His breathing had changed, slower, heavier. The second boy's jaw trembled. He tried to shift his weight casually, but his hands wouldn't stay still. The youngest of the three looked away. But it didn't help. His eyes had already given him away. David didn't need to say anything else. The weight of the moment was doing all the talking for him. And then it happened, the crack. The smallest one brushed at his face, quick, hoping no one saw. But they all did. And once the first tear fell, the others didn't stand a chance. Tears aren't always about guilt. Sometimes they're about realizing you've been smaller than you thought you were. And if you're still here, still watching without subscribing, ask yourself, if this moment got to them, what's stopping from getting to you? David didn't gloat. He didn't lecture. He simply folded the photo and tucked it away like the conversation was over, because it was. The boys didn't follow. They didn't call out. They just stood there, silent, their sneakers scuffing lightly against the tile. Through the glass, David could see Daniel waiting, his small frame still and patient, like he wasn't sure if he should ask what happened. David crouched down so they were eye level. He didn't mention the boys. He didn't need to. "Let's go home," he said simply. That smile was all David needed to know he'd done the right thing, not just for his son, but for the kind of man he wanted his son to see him as. Sometimes, walking away doesn't mean losing. Sometimes it means you've already said everything that needed to be said. And if you're still watching without subscribing, maybe you're waiting for stories that feel real. This one was. And the next one will be too. The truck rolled out of the parking lot. The school shrinking in the rearview mirror. Inside, neither of them spoke, and they didn't need to. For David, this wasn't about winning or proving a point. It was about showing his son that some things are worth standing up for, even if your voice shakes. Daniel didn't ask what happened, but there was something in his expression, a quiet knowing, a kind of safety that only comes when you realize someone is willing to fight for you. Back at the school, life would go on. The boys would remember the look in David's eyes long after the echo of their own laughter had faded. Some lessons aren't taught in classrooms. They're taught in moments, the kind that don't make headlines, but change people just the same. If you've been here from the start and haven't subscribed yet, I have to ask, why? If you believe these moments matter, if you think stories like this deserve to be told, then don't wait. Subscribe now, because the next story might be the one that stays with you forever.